Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to all of you who have come just for this final session of the day. We are so happy that you are here. Today's last panel is entitled Afrofuturism and the Black Imagination. The panel will be moderated by Northeastern's own Moya Bailey, who will introduce each of the panelists as they come up: Jennings, Nettrice, Gaskins, and Terry Marshall. I want to just remind you also that at the conclusion of this session and the Q&A, we will have a reception downstairs in Gallery 360. So if anyone has not been down there yet, please join us down there and see the exhibition. And without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Hello. Hi. Again, my name is Moya Bailey, and I come to you as someone who came to Comix late. I grew up thinking comics were for boys and were kind of a waste of time. And it wasn't really until I started to do work on the internet and in digital spaces, started reading the Boondocks, that I learned about fandoms and just what power is actually in this particular medium. And I was able to see the different things that could be accomplished by using both images and words together. And I am really honored to be facilitating this conversation with Black folks who are doing work in the world that I really admire. These panelists are creating work that helps usher in new possibilities and potentials for Black people. So to begin, I want to give some grounding for you, the audience, about what we mean when we say Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is an umbrella term that is used to describe the creative cultural production of Black people in a myriad of mediums. Afrofuturism sounds like Janelle Monáe and Sun Ra and Sarah. It looks like Wagenshi Muto's artwork or the activism of the Black Power movement. Afrofuturism is about imagining Black people's survival and thriving in the future. So much of Black history and present is marred by oppression and violence. Afrofuturism offers a way forward to new worlds and new realities that perhaps hold less pain than the past and present. All of our panelists today are working in this tradition, and I think you will see how their work really challenges us in some really wonderful ways. So I'm going to actually introduce our panelists. Jennings is a nationally recognized cartoonist, designer, graphic novelist, and associate professor of visual studies at the University of Buffalo. Jennings' art and teachings focus on African American stereotypes in popular visual media, and he's an accomplished designer, curator, illustrator, cartoonist, and award-winning graphic novelist. His creative practice is concerned with the topics of representation and authenticity, visual culture, visual literacy, social justice, and design pedagogy. Next, we'll be hearing from Nettrice Gaskins. Nettrice's topic is African cosmology, techno-vernacular, creativity and innovation in Afrofuturism, specifically the relationship between African representational and spiritual space, mapping, sound, and data visualization. Nettrice Gaskins' PhD majored in visual art at DuPont Manual High School in Louisville, Kentucky. We've got a couple of Southerners on the panel. She earned a BFA in computer graphics with honors from Pratt Institute in 1992 and an MFA in art and technology from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1994. She received a doctorate in digital media from Georgia Tech in 2014, and she is currently the STEAM Lab Director at Boston Arts Academy. And STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. And last and certainly not least, Terry Marshall has been involved in youth and social justice struggles for over 15 years and founded Boston-based organization Intelligent Mischief in 2013. In 2008, Terry became the lead youth organizer of the Healthcare Education Project, an initiative of 1199 SEIU in New York City. While there, he led the innovative Young Voices for Healthcare campaign to involve young people in the healthcare reform struggle. Terry is a superstar facilitator that serves for several national social justice organizations, Center for Story-Based Strategy, Beautiful Trouble, and co-founder of the Blackout Collective. He also serves on the board for Center for Artistic Activism and Boston Area Youth Organizing Project. And so now that I've introduced everyone, I want to give the panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves further by talking a bit about their work and how they see their work really connected to this idea of Afrofuturism. And John will get us started.
Okay. Thank you for coming out. And again, like Moya was saying, this is an amazing panel. A lot of, and she's not really talking about how wonderful she is too. She's awesome as well, but you probably know that. Let's see. So, as far as like my work in Afrofuturism, I think that what connecting to what has been called Afrofuturism or Black speculative culture, the pieces in the show actually were my first kind of foray into thinking about that. There are pieces that you probably see them in the hallway, or if you haven't been to the space yet, and there's some probably flashing behind us too. It was from a series called Matters of the Fact, where I started thinking about the idea of how the stereotype gets manufactured over and over again. Of course, the title is coming from The Fact of Blackness by Frantz Fanon. And I was thinking about how stereotyping, to a certain degree, is from the printing profession, because stereotyping is a printing process, and the word stereos actually means hard or fixed. So a lot of these ideas of stereotyping is about fixity, about not changing. And so I'm a stereotype hunter. You know, I actually hunt them down, expose them, make work about them. So if you look at like some of the original, writing about Afrofuturism by someone like Mark Derry, right? He actually talks about Black comic books quite a bit in the piece, where he mentions Milestone Media, which is a African American company that was part of DC Comics that was publishing in the 1990s. About the same time he was positing these ideas of Afrofuturism. Comics like Static Shock or Static, right, or Icon and Rocket, or Hardware, which is they're really wonderful work. They're going to be republished hopefully pretty soon. But I've noticed that there was kind of like I've been trying to like connect those things a lot more with my own work in comics, and basically say, hey, this actually is a really stronger connection than we're actually like realizing. So you might have like an Afrofuturism panel at, say, a Black comic convention, and not really understand that this is actually just another node of cultural production that needs to be really explored, right? So I've been thinking about those aspects as well. I'm really into the political nature of images and how they function. We talked about earlier about this notion of symbolic annihilation, right? Where you will have a dominant culture that is, to a certain degree, either on purpose or not on purpose, erasing the history of people who are not in power. And so it's very traumatizing to not see yourself reflected in that space. And we had also talked about the notion of the default, right? So I try to create spaces in my work, in the work that I do as a community builder, to, like, again, shift the default, to actually like alter that default. I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of wonderful people who work in this arena, and a lot of my images, my cover designs, have graced the cover of some of the seminal pieces about Afrofuturism, which has been really awesome. Like the new one from Ronaldo Anderson. Anyway, so to a certain degree, some of the books that have been like being generated, or projects like Ferguson is the Future that Moya actually co-curated and put together, organized at Princeton. Last year? No, was it last year? Yeah, looking at the intersections between, as Moya was saying, Black activism, Black Lives Matter, the activism against the new Jim Crow, and how it intersects with the radicalized idea of like a future for people of color. So that's why I was thinking about with my friend Ronaldo, who co-created this book, co-organized this book, is this idea of like the Black speculative arts movement. So this notion of how like the original Black arts movement was kind of like connected to Black power, how these newer spaces are still in need, and actually going back to this essential notion of how do we actually get past these systemic issues. And so two more things, and I'm going to stop talking. I co-organized a kind of Afrofuturist think tank with my friend Adelifu Nama at Loyola Marymount University. It's called Astro Blackness, which is based off of the Sun Ra song Astro Black, where basically we bring in a lot of people from various backgrounds to talk about these issues. And we have a spin-off venue at my alma mater and my home state of Mississippi called Planet Deep South, where we're looking at how the Black imaginary and Black aspirations kind of start these generative ideas in the South, right? So, and looking at how people like, for instance, Sun Ra or Henry Dumas or Fannie Lou Hamer could be kind of posited as like proto-Afrofuturist or as Afrofuturist. So, and I'm going to shut up.
In 2010, I pitched to IBM. Used to have a space in Second Life, which is a virtual 3D world, and I was doing research on Afrofuturism at the time, and pitched the idea to IBM they should sponsor me as an artist to create an entire simulation for Afrofuturism, and they sponsor it, and they liked it. So in 2010, I created alternate futures. And the idea was to explore virtual space as a place for imagining or speculating the future. So it was both an archive, so it was an archive of a lot of different, from George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic's Mothership, to Janelle Monáe, to Akhenaten, ancient Egypt, just all the different residences of Afrofuturism over the course of history. And then also looking forward to more contemporary artists, graffiti artists, hip hop artists. I was looking at Ramel Z, and so you'll see some of the 3D work, virtual 3D work behind me. And the idea was to just kind of like dig into all of this and then recreate and simulate and do some 3D modeling and then embed computer programming into the models and really just go geek out, tech out, and really explore this in a way that hadn't been done before in virtual 3D space. So it was up for about most of the summer, and it ended when I began my studies at Georgia Tech. And some things I sort of picked up from that experience was that I was starting to pull historical artifacts, cultural artifacts that was resonating throughout. And I talk about the cosmogram a lot because I was creating mapping. When you go into a space as an avatar, you're a character, similar to a video game. And instead of playing a game, you're kind of walking around and experiencing, immersed in a space as an avatar. But in order to get around the space, because it's a pretty big space, you have to sort of navigate through maps. So I used the cosmogram motif as a way for people to navigate from place to place in the exhibition. And that was my first kind of looking at mapping, navigating, finding your position in space. And what I began to realize was that there's this whole historical moment, a series of moments when we have been coding and encoding cultural artifacts with information from, the myth and fact of the Underground Railroad, the quilts, where, the idea that you would take locations and symbols and let people know where the next way station was, to the way we look at GPS today. And then also looking at the cosmogram as a map, because that's what it is. It's actually a representation of the universe. You will find the cosmogram in many cultures, not just in Africa, but also in Asia and in Native American culture and indigenous culture, including Aboriginal and in the United States. So if you go to the Smithsonian Museum for the American Indian, every single group that's included has their own version of a cosmogram, and it's up on the wall. So this is a way in which people have placed themselves in the center of the universe or placed themselves in the world. So these are people who have been displaced from mainstream dominant narratives and information, placing themselves and creating new systems that they then see the world through. Understanding that as a map and then understanding as a technology, how we use these type of technologies from GPS to whatever, to state our location in and place ourselves in the space. So I saw this as a way of countering being displaced or not being the center of a discourse or a discussion or a show or things like that. I saw this as a way to also sort of go from science fiction to science fact, where we can actually begin to change our space physically as well as virtually. So we began to layer the space with our own imagery. We began to remix space, remix 2D and 3D, do mixed realities, where we mix analog and virtual together. I I began looking at mural making and how we can embed technology into murals so that we can give information or art or music to people who had mobile devices. These were all areas that I sort of explored with my studies at Georgia Tech. And as I was beginning to get more, and I started kind of in virtual worlds, and then I was back in the physical world, I began to realize that there was a relationship between our ability to navigate, to place ourselves in. And then I started seeing music videos where, for example, the Unisphere and the site of the World's Fair from 1964, 1965 kept showing up in hip hop music videos. So Craig Mack was in front of it. The Beastie Boys on their first album are in front of it. And then in 2010, Talib Kweli put out a video called In This World. And it changed. Now we see a change. Instead of standing in front of the Unisphere, he became the center of it. So the rings that go around the Unisphere now go around him. So this idea of positioning yourself in the world, centering yourself, is now happening in our visual and in the way we see ourselves in this new global economy, in this global world, where we're more aware and we have more connections than we ever had. So realizing that this is an empowering kind of thing, I began thinking about remixing, but remixing and then moving into sound. So sound became important because how we immerse ourselves in space is also through sound. We often talk about visuals, but we're often inspired by music when we create the artwork. So I began collaborating with different DJs. I began using computer programming and using software to sort of visualize what sound looks like. So what does it look like when you're remixing and playing around with noise? So I worked with a DJ in New Mexico, did it there, and we projected the imagery onto buildings, to Adobe buildings, walls, and things like that. And then I started working with Hank Shockley, a Public Enemy, and that was an important connection because Hank Shockley, his whole thing is about future frequencies, and his whole thing is about noise and future frequencies. If you read George Clinton's new book, he talks about Hank Shockley and the Bomb Squad and how impressed he was at the way in which they were able to sort of manipulate noise and change it. And so it was almost on the verge of chaos, but not. So when I had a conversation, I collaborated with Hank at Illuminous, which happened here at the Fenway Ballpark. I started talking to him about what's more important about your music. He talked about the frequencies, and I realized that the software that I was using allows me to create visuals based on frequency. So this kind of blew us. He was like very excited to see what visually would look like as he's sort of doing his production. And so the images you see behind me are what happens when I take John's, this is the new book, Afrofuturism 2.0, hot off the press from the publisher. And John, it's a two-part book, so to get the whole piece, you have to buy both books. So this is the first one, and just came out this month. And so what happens if I take the original artwork, and then, and it's some music that I'm feeling that's Afrofuturistic, and see how that responds. What happens when I take Erykah Badu's new mixtape artwork, and then play the mixtape music and see how that the code changes the imagery or responds and creates a vibration. And I was doing a lot of this idea of vibration, noise, and frequency, and virtual sounding space and sounds, and how this also is a way of sort of placing us in the future where we begin to construct our own imagery and spaces and the way in which we change and remix the way we experience life and experience the future today. So the idea of sitting in between science, fact, and fiction, the idea of using computer programming as a way, and virtual worlds as a way to sort of riff on or to remix. So a lot of cultural artifacts, art of Afrofuturist texts, looking at visual culture and communication. These kind of things are really what my artwork is about recently, and I've been exploring in many ways. So that's basically me.
Now, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's such a difference. So first, I just want to start off saying that I feel very honored to be invited to speak on this panel, and the people that I'm on the panel with, I'm very much, you can't see it right now, but I'm just geeking out with the people I'm sitting next to on the panel. It's like, when they told me who was going to be on the panel, I was like, yo, what? Are you sure you got the right person? So very honored for that. I'm also honored to be up here because my mother worked at Northeastern as a custodian for 20 years and she just retired last year. So I feel very honored to be, as the son of someone who worked here, who's cleaning the bathrooms, to also be speaking and presenting to audience right now. Feels a great victory for our moms. And also another victory for her. Thank you.
Seriously.
Another victory for her is also she retired and she's living in Barbados half-time and living here half-time. So, you know.
Nice.
And another reason also to be honored to be in the same space is that I just want to give a shout out to Tony Robinson and Millionaire Picnic comic book store. I don't know if Tony recognizes me. I've been going to the comic book store since I was high school. and I come in, I'm like, where else in Boston do you come in where your local comic book shop owner is like an intellectual speaking on panels? Like, it's tripping me out. So I definitely want to meet up with Tony sometime. So as Moya said, Terry Marshall, founder of Intelligent Mischief. What are we? We call ourselves a Creative Action Design Lab. And what we do, what we tell most people is we help grassroots organizations, low-income communities, incorporate arts and culture in their organizing, right? That's the simple view. Our mission statement is to boost invention and imagination, to experiment with new forms of civil society to create atmospheres of change. Within that, the very principle of Afrofuturism is embedded in our organization, right? There's 4 members. It's me, Christine Dejon, Aisha Shillingford, and Khalik Williams. All of us are Afro-Caribbean descent. And so we see the way how we use arts and culture changing the world, how people help people's imagination, how imagination is the kernel for change. For anyone, if you want to like change the world, you have to start with imagination. That Afrofuturism is just from the get-go is incorporates all that, right? And so I see my end of work as it's the end of making not just the speculative fiction, making the speculative fiction real. And so I want to give an example of how we do that in some of our work. So some of the stuff we consult groups, we also do our own experiments. So I'm pretty sure people here are familiar with the name Trayvon Martin, right? So I, among as well as a lot of other people, was kind of looking at Trayvon Martin's murderer trials going on. And I was also, even though I've been doing political organizing for years, I had I was so shocked by the verdict, right? And so I was just like, there's so much evidence. So that just led me to this project idea where I was like thinking, man, the police keep saying that like when these tragic killings happen and Black people are murdered and they haven't done anything, even all the evidence show they haven't done anything. But they keep saying that it's the victim's fault. So it's like, it's just that Black people, there must be some new rules put in place, and Black people don't know those new rules. So it'd be really great if they had a guide just telling them what those rules were, so they wouldn't get shot for no reason. It's always their fault. And so I came with that idea, and I came with a crew, Intelligent Mischief, and we're gonna play this video. Moya can play this video and see for yourself.
What is that right there? A hot mess. A hot mess of hotness. Yeah, you're right. I don't know what they actually doing right there. I don't get it. Jesus help us all.
Stop. Don't turn off your device. Stop. Don't turn off your device. We are in control of your media. Black bodies are under attack. Every day we hear stories about the attack on Black lives. This is not a war. This is a culling. Your options are imprisonment, death, or survival. If you choose survival, you will need help. You must acquire a copy of the Black Body Survival Guide. Christian, can you come downstairs, please? Mom, I'm working on Black freedom. What is the Black Body Survival Guide, you ask? It is a key to a door. Tips and tricks to survive the stark reality. Who is the Black Body Survival Guide for? Anyone who believes in the survival of the Black body and the freedom of the people who wish to be. We are out of time. If you wish to be the architect of your own liberation, join us in supporting the Black Body Survival Guide. Don't wait. Cut the connection.
So great.
The star of that video was Christine Dejon, who's also a member of Intelligent Mischief. So that video, right, is part of our entry, our physical entry into Afrofuturism. So the book originally became, it was an idea where we wanted to show people the power of hacking. We was like, yo, we get a bunch of people together, we could make a book in a day. Think of the most absurd tips, right? Because we wanted to be surreal, right? We came with this term, when reality gets absurd, it's time to get surreal. Because he's like, that's the point we're at. That's the point that black bodies, black people are living in. Like, the killings are just, like, not just the police killings, but the conditions, like the lack of access to healthcare and education, all these things. It's just surreal that the only way to combat it is with like absurdity, right? It's absurd itself, so we had to bring surrealism, which we also think of in the tradition of Afro-surrealism, right? But also, when we started doing it, we thought we'd make a book in a day, wasn't quite making it. We was like, it's not really come together in a day. And people were so excited about this idea that they said, you should make it a real book. So then we've been going through a process for the last year and a half of like, okay, let's collect some tips from people, crowdsource, let's make tips ourselves. We're writing it ourselves. But we also, within that, we've been looking at, okay, how you make the tips. But we also want to be an organizing tool, right? So we said, how can we make the tips real? And so one of our tips we came up with was, we said that, you need a white ally, right? You need a white cosigner, and wherever you go, like, oh, you need that white person who could like give you your pass, right? Like, oh, he's a good Negro, right? And we said, oh, what if we make this real? What if we made a card? So we collaborated with the Center of Story-Based Strategy. We made a race card. So actually have them in my bag. They're able to bring them up. But we have these cards that we then did a digital campaign where we tagged like our white friends and white allies saying, can you be my white cosigner? And the card says like, before you encounter in a dangerous situation with this black body, please call me. I can verify that they're a good person, and so on and so on. And we had a lot of white friends like sign like, I'll be your white cosigner. Yes. So we just one of the ways where we was like, this was a tip we just made up. Then we made a real thing, but that real thing then starts a conversation with people, right? To like, that's a real thing in the real world, right? Having a white cosigner. Among other things, we then started to create. We create the T-shirt when reality gets absurd, it's time gets surreal. Another way that we ventured into this was also we created another T-shirt called Ancient Futures, right? And where we take a lot of what looks like a lot of indigenous cultures, but then add something futuristic to it. And we have this thing of saying like we go back in our past to go forward, right? Which is another aspect of Afrofuturism. But then we're also using the T-shirt to like fund ourselves and our organizations and what we do, So make it like reinforcing and combining, and still creating all these things to create conversations, which we hope then to create get people to create like a counter hegemonic demands, right? A counter hegemonic reality, right? If we could turn this fiction, our idea is to turn the fiction into reality, because anything, as long as you think about it, right? Like, and I take this from Adrienne Marie Brown, many people up here know personally. She talks about like all types of organizing. You do community organizing, that's science fiction, that's speculative fiction. When the slaves were imagining freedom wasn't a real thing for them. They imagined us all this century later, right? So this is the key things that like I would even advocate for Afrofuturism being the official critical theory and ideology of the current movement for Black lives. Like we should like dig into this deeper, and that's what I think our work tries to do. Like not just have it be on the paper or in videos, but like then how do we take this imagination and make these things real? When people talk about even like going back to Africa, so that's a dream, right? Some people actually do that. Some people go on, right? But it's like, well, what does that then create? Pan-Africanism, so we could have solidarity uniting the world of freedom. When we had civil rights struggle, breaking Jim Crow had been around for at least a century. People actually broke it, and so we're still imagining, but it starts with imagination to create change. And I'll just stop there.
It's wonderful.
Yes, thank you. Something that came up in all of your conversations was a conversation that begins with space and place. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about space and place, where you've come from, how that informs your work, and how it informs the way you think about Afrofuturism.
Okay. Of late, I'm from Mississippi. I was born in 1970, and so like post-civil rights era Mississippi, financially challenged, also known as like a couple steps of probably like dirt poor, right? In a space where the metaphorical shadow of Emmett Till was your constant companion. So a lot of these ideas around space and safe spaces is something that started happening early on. Getting home before the lights go out, that kind of thing, or before it gets dark, that kind of thing. And so I've been really interested in these like these traumatic spaces that I term the ethnogothic, looking at like the Black experience in America as a Gothic experience and how it's a haunted space, and that these are kind of like the apparitions of reparations. I call them reparations. Reparations. Sorry, like these notions of like ghostly revenants that we are still dealing with. So a lot of my work recently, I do some work that could be termed like more like Afrofuturist or science fiction or speculative in nature in a futuristic sense, but I keep finding that my work going back to the South, like going back to my roots, so to speak. Right? So a lot of my stuff has been dealing with hoodoo and technology. My main character is the fictitious cousin of Robert Johnson. His name is Frank Half Dead Johnson, and he lives in like 1930s Chicago. So it's about those aspirational ideas, like I said, dreaming of a future space, but then how you kind of loop back around. The reason why we were doing Planet Deep South, again, is like thinking about like, okay, what does the future South look like? Because right now, Southern hip hop is really in, and have all these different things that are coming out of the South. The South has always been a space of revenue, well, has been, in the past, been a space of revenue and change for America. And to a certain degree is the space where we keep like skeletons, and it's this weird. How many people have been down south? How many people have been in Mississippi? Right? Okay, all right. That's more than usual. Usually it's like, oh, I drove through it. I was on my way to New Orleans. That kind of thing, right? I'm from that space, right? And so Jackson, Mississippi, right now is like driving through a corpse, and it's like all these boarded houses. It's all this like pain, and you can feel it in the red dirt, So a lot of the work that we've been doing recently is to think about where those spaces are. So I've been working with my friend Regina Bradley, talking about this kind of fusion between like trap music and cyberpunk. We call it cyber trap. And so what does a future, urbanized Southern space sound like, look like? And again, I'm a graphic novelist, so I'm always thinking about the illustrated space, but also the audacity of what a future Black Southern space looks like, and actually pushing against some of those boundaries about that. So I think spatially, I've been thinking about home a lot, and thinking about what the future of home is going to be, whether it's going to be like, post-apocalyptic or, nihilistic or something other. I'm not really sure, but that's where I'm going with it. And I think space definitely is extremely important, and it's something that actually fuels a lot of the ideas around my organizing and creating these Black speculative spaces. Because one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of children and families come to these spaces, and it's so empowering to see kids see heroes and authors and publishers who look like them, who are making things that are driving, like you said, the imagination. What you said about imagination, I think, is extremely important. I think Robin D.G. Kelly's book, Freedom Dreams, is something that actually is a really, really powerful kind of proto-Afrofuturist space, because you have to have that spark first, right? So I'm going to stop talking.
So when I was growing up, my mother was a computer programmer. I was growing up in Kentucky. Wanted to be an artist. Didn't know anybody Black that did computer programming. And today I know very few people that are Black who do computer programming the way my mother did. So she was very isolated in her career, but in her interests, amongst a bunch of a family of factory workers and people who were poor. And so we were an anomaly. We were the different family. My sister's an engineer. So I, with being an artist, did not want to do anything with technology or computers. I wanted to be a visual artist. So I was uninterested until I got into my junior year of high school. So currently I'm at Boston Arts Academy. In high school, I went to a magnet school, which had a visual arts major. So my major was visual arts. And my ceramics teacher, who I'm still friends with today, decided one day out of nowhere that she wanted to teach a computer graphics class. And she asked me if I would join her small group, and I said no. And so she came back around a couple weeks later and she said, I know you need electives for your senior year. I really want you to be in this computer graphics class. I said, nope. And then she had a look, and then I thought about it and I said, yes. So what I remember from this is she had a very, very nice ceramic space, like a clay, slab rollers, you know, your traditional sculpture stuff. And we expected to come into that first class ready to do computer graphics, whatever that meant. And it was just a kiln and a slab roller with a Commodore computer on it. Wow. And so some red tape was going on with the public school system. She hadn't gotten her money to buy the computers, but she needed to start a class. So we started with one of the earlier computers that she had at home that she brought from her house in the basement. And that's how we started computer graphics. It was the portfolio that I produced between that time and applying for college that got me a full ride to Pratt Institute. And so I think about the turnaround time, since I do work with students now, and how long it takes to develop a portfolio. And what it took for her to jump from ceramics, clay, wood, to digital, and willing to take that leap, and new students that would take the leap with her, reminds me a lot of what I do as a STEAM lab director with independent study students who are willing to take jumps and leaps into areas they've never even thought about. So, you know, I have students who are music students and visual arts students who are doing game design, who are, we have a student, a sheriff student with Barrington who's in the audience, who is a visual arts senior, and she's fabricating out of wood her drawings, and she's putting electric paint on it and making circuits, and then you are able to mix like hip hop music videos by touching the drawing. What? And she's doing that right now in this STEAM lab space. So I think about me being a high school student, not knowing any black computer programmers, having this teacher who was white, but have this me as an artist, becoming alive, learning a new world that I never even saw myself in. And then I think about these young people that I'm working with having the same opportunities with the technologies that we have available to them, and being able to remix and recreate and create blueprints that don't exist yet, and create and innovate in a way that we were doing back then. And it's an amazing time. But it's also a big challenge to do that when you don't have the resources.
I would say for me, in terms of space and how that influenced me growing up, I would say my whole life, my whole existence, I've occupied alternate realities at the same time, right? Living in the mainstream reality. So one is I've grown up, I'm black, grown up here in Boston. At the same time, my family's from Barbados, and we've been fortunate enough to, when I was little, up until I was about 15, we used to go to Barbados like every summer. My mother was like really, like that was something she really wanted hard. Like I remember my cousins making fun of me, being like, "Oh, he's American." My mother would be like, "No, he's Bayesian. You know, he's Barbadian. Like he's gonna get this culture as well." You know. But I think what that instilled in me was like I every summer I got to see this alternate universe where black people were everywhere, right? And black people ran the government. Black people was like everything in society, right? And that does something for you psychologically, especially coming back into the United States, right, and living in the system that we live in. But then also grew up in Boston. And I don't know how many people are from Boston, but Boston is just like super segregated growing up. And so you could just be, changed a little bit with some of the gentrification that's happening now. But there's just areas of Boston you could walk in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and never see a white person, right? Unless they was a cop. And that, like, I think some of that, all those things, right? Like, I think had inadvertently reinforced in me like a strong identity in myself. And I could also use it like envision a different world, a different way of being that someone probably grew up somewhere else. But having these like multiple identities at one time. I also went to also complicate it even more, I went to a Muslim school from 1st to 8th grade. A school that was like Orthodox Muslim, Sunni Muslim, but still reinforced like black pride and black consciousness. So I had these like triple things going on for me where, I could see I could see change happening, right? I could imagine that happening because it was something that was always reinforced, and I walked through these identities like all at once. Me and Aisha Shillingford, who's sitting in the back over there, who's probably tells mischief, we've been talking a lot on this theory of a third culture, right? A lot of folks who are also immigrants possess a third culture. You could see something different, a different layer of the world, which is why a lot of folks who have like existing multiple identities and backgrounds are the ones who often are attracted to social change and are also attracted to the otherness, which also probably led me to like really loving comic books, right? I've been collecting comics since I was 5, and really was by accident. I went to bother my older sister who was like in college, and her friends were having like intense discussion about about who Storm was dating, Storm for the X-Men. And I was like, who y'all talking about? And she threw me the comic, like, here, read this. And it blew my mind, right? It just blew my mind seeing like, one, the X-Men, I could totally relate to them as my little 5, 6-year-old mind saying like, oh, mutants are black people. I totally understand this. Not, and it also helps that at the time when I was reading comics first, Storm was the leader of the X-Men. It's like a black woman that's leading the superhero group team. You never see that, right? Who also has these like immense powers, like controls the weather. So that like totally was reinforcing me all these things that helped me like lead into social change. And being like a young black person who before it's popular to be a black geek, you're totally in the comics. And I'm like discovering there used to be a comic book shop in downtown Boston. That was like first time discovering that. I begged my mother after we was done shopping at Macy's, can we go up in there? Found Millionaire Picnic, found other comic books around Boston. So I think all those things are like all different spaces. The comic book shop is a different space. Barbados as a homeland, even Boston having a tight black and like multiracial community that's like never seen in popular culture. Even have that understanding shapes and reinforces my identity that leads me to what I'm doing today.
That's great.
Something that came up in your conversation as well are people who kind of helped you expand into your Afrofuturism. I wonder if you could say a bit more perhaps about an artist, a family member, those people who really opened the door for you to start thinking in these imaginative, creative ways.
Really? We're not gonna mix it up. Okay, all right. All right, cool. My mother, honestly, was a huge catalyst for me. I have the coolest mom on the planet. She was really into these really super imaginative spaces. She was a literature major, English lit major at Alcorn State University, one of the HBCUs in Mississippi, and so she had lots of books laying around. Stuff like Poe. I started reading Poe like super early. Actually, I was a big Poe fan. Let's see, Stephen King. She really reads a lot. I read a lot of horror. My mom's a huge horror fan, and also anything that has the word blood or ninja in it. So I actually ended up reading a lot of really like wild stuff at a young age. And then I grew up in like grind houses, like the second run theaters. Like, so my mom and I would just go and like pay $1 and go see every kung fu movie ever created, for like $1, that kind of thing. And she got me my first comics, because I was really into mythology, and also very early interested in like just like, I guess you would call it iconography and symbolism. I could remember like just being fascinated by like the shapes and things of that nature. So I had no idea that was my graphic designer coming out of me, right? But she was a huge influence on that. And my grandmother, who helped raise me as well, she probably was a hoodoo practitioner. I think so. When I look at like the stuff that she would say, in retrospect, now looking at those magical spaces, probably on the sly, she was probably a root worker, right? Because a lot of things that she was saying were about things that I know are connected directly to that particular practice, right? That particular technology. So I would say that was a really huge influence on me as well. The other thing is that both of them were quilters, right? So I was studying, like, I don't make quilts. I'm fascinated by them though. The character Kid Code, for instance, that Stacey and myself and my friend Damien create, they time travel through a quilt. It's actually like a quilt, like a cosmic quilt that's been like spun by these 4 cosmic DJs, right? It's called The Incredible. That's the name of it. Like, once again, this is The Incredible. The whole piece, right? Anyway, so it's called The Incredible, right? And so each section is a quilt part, right? So that actually is directly connected to, my grandmother's quilting practice. And also in Blue Hand Mojo, which is another comic I work on, there's a character called the Noir that is like the avatar or the reification of Black creativity, and it's a female form. It's based off of this Italian artist's work. Her name is Mamona Gueresi. She does these beautiful forms where it's like just a black face with like a drapery or a piece. You've seen it, right? It's beautiful stuff. And so the overarching piece is a quilt. And so all these are just references to, my mother's really messed me up really good at an early age with pretty much everything that I should not have been watching. And I think it was like, again, it was probably a conspicuous consumption. My mom is a very soft-spoken woman, but I see her politics coming out in the things that she consumed. And so I really didn't have like a lot of restraint when it came to my imagination. And again, I came up in a space where I didn't have a lot of access to things. I literally would like lay on top of, I know this sounds really like what's the guy's name? Never mind. Andrew Wyeth, right? Where I'm like laying on top of a barn, like literally laying on top of a barn, which I should not have been doing. But I was looking at stars and actually literally stargazing and thinking about the future and realizing that there was something else outside of the small like nook that I was in Mississippi, right? So anyway, the end.
So in addition to computer programming, my mother was a big Jimi Hendrix fan. And my father was into Parliament Funkadelic. The music was always around me, but it was the album covers of Pedro Bell's album covers for Parliament Funkadelic that began my interest in Afrofuturism, specifically. Pedro's work, I used to look at it as a very small child, just look at them, study them. Now, obviously, they weren't always for children, but he created worlds in these album covers. They're so rich in imagery and colors and text. And he's inspired by comic books. Just to look at his work and just be able to imagine that what kind of mind it took to really create these worlds that he was sort of riffing off of the music with. And sometimes they write the music to his album covers. And understanding that you could create in an album cover a future, a new world, that's where it began for me. And so before I even got into what we know as Western technology, so computers and so on, I was really just looking at artists like Pedro Bell who were inspired by music, but also looking at creating new narratives and new ways in which to sort of create a world that Black people lived in, that Black people were robots in, that Black people were humans in, they were hybrids and they were cyborgs. And that was really my inspiration, and it showed up in my artwork. It showed up in a lot of the kind of things I did. And then when I was creating them in virtual space, I created a Sun Ra scepter and it was really riffing off of Sun Ra. But also I took and redid the Cosmic Slop album cover and did it in 3D modeling in a sense and replaced the face with my face and really just went there and see how far I could go. So this kind of relationship between the visual image, sound, music, and eventually science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of these kinds of things came from that early exposure to what I was doing with those album covers way back when.
Wow. I would say, yeah, for me, there's so many people who probably influenced me. Definitely my mother, and also I would say my father, particularly in terms of like just the science fiction and look at speculative fiction. I was so into Star Trek, like love Star Trek. I'm talking like in Doctor Who and stuff like that. I'm like 6, 7, 8, watching all this stuff. And my father always like made it a point to like see what I was interested in, and then he would just randomly come home one day that he bought something for me, you know. And I remember he bought me like a Star Trek encyclopedia one day and just like gave it to me. I think he even bought me like a Klingon dictionary or something, right? Like he would just be like, he really likes this, I'm gonna bring it for him, you know. And those little things like really encourage and shape people and who they go on to become. I have to also say like my mother, particularly in a way of my mother's love for soap operas, and like just introduced that like being around story and storytelling, right? Like we would think soap opera. Like I think how many people in the world watch soap operas? Like it's these stories that really capture people, right? So you can find like these fictions in all these different mediums. But I would say another way that she's also encouraged me was definitely make sure that we went home to Barbados, but also here in Boston was the West Indian Festival. In Barbados, our carnival is called Crop Over. And getting to see Crop Over, like if you understand the politics of carnival, like how it's just when carnival time, it's just an alternate universe. Like realities just switch, right? And seeing like the costumes and seeing like how you just have Black people just have control of public space. And that's a brief moment, a brief day that the state is actually afraid of you, right? Right. and like particularly in Barbados, another thing I saw that I think would like help me, and this is just going to like how living different realities, and you can see like what you see here, what you see that's like material doesn't necessarily mean what's real, right? And all that things could change. Is I distinctly remember only around carnival time, crop over time in Barbados, there would just be what I would see was like a group of men who would dress up like women and be very flamboyant, and everyone would be like around them. It would be like this joking thing, and I never understood. I would always be like, this is just seems like part of things, right? And like as I got older, I'm understanding like, well, what I'm probably guessing is that these were like queer folk who carnival time was a few times that they could be very safe and very public in how they behaved, and people may know stories of like homophobia coming out of the Caribbean and Jamaica in particular, but not to corn off like just like have a more ask people to have a more complex understanding of like how that operates from island to island. But in Barbados, the way I would see interactions would be folks they would be dressed as women. It'd be like this thing where everyone's like just laughing at them, but there wasn't a sense of danger. There wasn't a sense of danger to them. It was like, oh, they're part of the show, right? And as I got older, I was like, wow, these are folks. They're probably like the time they can be safe and out, And so seeing that and like just like under kind of like computing that in my brain of like, there's different ways of being, there's different realities. Like this static way that you're taught isn't the way it has to be, and that like also leads me like understand science fiction, Afrofuturism, like which deals with our identities, which deals with our liberation, which deals with all different multiple mediums and art forms. Like that, those things make the impressions as well.
I really like where you all started to go. Is there a specific project or other aspect of Afrofuturism that you feel like really resonates with you now? Like, is there something that's on top for you in terms of things that you're working on or things in the past that have really inspired the work itself?
Doing this work with STEAM and kind of being in multiple modalities at the same time is something that I feel is very about future, creating and innovating for something that doesn't exist yet. When you come into the STEAM lab, for example, there are no computers that you can see. You see equipment, but you don't see what you could do with them. You come in there and you sort of have to come up with an idea. So I had a student come in and he took his guitar out. And he said, I want to take the pick guard off of the guitar, and I want to do electronics and embed LED lights so when I'm playing, the lights on the guitar respond to my playing. Just an idea. So then we began breaking apart how we're going to do that, and how he has no clue. He's never done programming before. Has never done electronics before. He knows a lot about his guitar and a lot about music, but he has this idea. So now we have a plan to do just that. So this idea of something that didn't exist before, that you had an idea to do, that you can come in, is really what I think of when I think of Afrofuturism, is you're thinking of new possibilities and not staying inside of a rigid box, so to speak. The box is fluid, it's flexible, it's maybe even transparent. You may be able to walk through it. It doesn't hinder your progress or your movement in any way. So I think it creates it's a container in a sense, but it's a container with open possibilities. So the work that I do now is creating gloves that respond to sound and convert sound to color, gloves that we're moving from gloves to actual sensors, so that you could put a sensor into a microcontroller, a small computer, and then as musicians play, sculptures light up and respond exactly to the music. And so then we can talk about the science of that, we can talk about the engineering of that, but we can also just talk about just how cool it is and what we can do with the possibilities of that. So this idea of open, having an open mind to possibilities is something that I feel like Afrofuturism sort of represents in speculative fiction, but also in sound and imagery, in terms of contemporary art, but also in engineering, science, technology, and mathematics.
I was just big up again our project, Black Body Survival Guide. So I know I probably gave a short description of it, but it's a multimedia project, was coming out being a book. We're still talking to different publishers. So the idea behind the book, right? So I gave you the idea behind the book, but like there's much more, right? Because we had to do world building for this project. So the idea is that this book is written by this agency called the Black Body Survival Agency, and that there's these agents who throughout history have been trying to liberate Black folk, and they live in a sort of like different dimension, different reality, or a different place. We're not sure yet, right? And throughout points of history, we have agents who like pop up in history, so like Malcolm X or Harriet Tubman, and so on and so forth. And now, right now, because of the new movement for Black Lives, there seems to be this crack and opening in the veil. So they're like, well, people need a guide, they need a book. So they're writing this book. Those agents are writing this book called the Black Lives Survival Guide. So it's like come out with tips, but also tricking people to understanding. It's sort of like code, just the same way the Underground Railroad had codes and messages to free people. It's like this code to be like, look, no book is going to help you. It's really about us organizing, getting together. But we need to like crack this veil of racism and white supremacy that's like dominating us, right? So you know, we have cosplay going on. We have a whole series of things. We have actually working with Wheelock College communications department, which has assisted us in creating videos. So we have more videos coming out related to the project. Another project I would say too, speaking about making fiction to reality. For myself, I also am planning to debut sort of a mobile. This is also another reason I want to talk to Tony and get some knowledge. Want to create like a mobile comic shop called Pop Art, which will focus on these like hard to find comics, or especially around Afrofuturism, a lot of the Afro manga that's coming out. I want there to be access. So I'm gonna have a table on the 23rd, a non-cease trading post at Makeshift in Boston, 545 Columbus Avenue. I think I have it right. Aisha will correct me if I don't. That. So that is going to be a new project and focus that I will have on too. So if anybody's available on the 23rd, please come out support us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Yeah, that's the things I'm interested about.
Okay. I'd like to make a note of all that's all amazing. We need to talk after. We will, right? Okay. Have you seen, Terry, have you seen the Beyond Comics, the Bayesian comic books company?
Yes.
Matthew Clark and them?
Yeah, yes.
They're-
Through Instagram.
Yes, so good. Okay, all right, just want to make sure. So right now, my major project that I'm working on with my friend Damian Duffy is I have the honor of, we're adapting Octavia Butler's Kindred into a graphic novel, which has been like so much work. Thank you, so much work. It's crazy. You have no idea, but it's like it's a labor of love, and so it's due. What the entire book is due in the middle of May. So it's been like the primary project that we've been working on right now. Right now, we're going through the breakdown processes where basically we're doing like all the breakdowns for the pages, and then Damien is also the letterer, so we're sending those back for edits, and then we're going to do the final art, and it'll be out next year from Abrams Comic Arts, which is it's a wonderful publisher, and it's been a great experience. Our editor, Sheila Keenan, is just a wonder to work with. She's a beautiful taskmaster, so that's, it's like we're getting it done. The other thing, and I actually took off from teaching I got a research leave to work on it, but the other project that I was working on, I'm getting ready to go back to teach now, was Unveiling Visions, the Alchemy of the Black Imagination, which was a art and design show that Nettrice is actually in as well, at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. The closing day is Saturday, which is the day of the Black Comic Book Festival that I co-organized there as well. I think, yeah, a few thousand people have came through the space, but basically it was a collection of artifacts, design work, what I call based off of some of Bruce Sterling's work, diegetic prototypes, like Nettrice is talking about, as far as like these artifacts that are connected directly to Afrofuturist spaces. Those things were created for that space. Along with my partner and friend, Stacey Robinson, we have this studio / avatar / shared authorship space called Black Kirby. And we are actually working on the rest of Kid Code Channel Zero, which is our hip hop time travel story. And we're getting ready to work on a piece with Tony Medina for Lee and Low Books called I Am Alfonso Jones, which is about a Black and Latino youth who is buying a suit at a space in Harlem so he can actually see his father come out of prison, right? And then he's killed by a cop accidentally. And the entire story is about this young man's apparition looking at the waves that are coming from his death, right? And so this is going to be a graphic novel. It's one of our next projects. We're going to be starting that in the summer. And yeah, and I'm really excited about the cyber trap too. I'm really that's something I'm really kind of been fascinated by. I think there's a bunch of other stuff, but that and Planet Deep South, which is, by the way, it's 24th through the 26th of February at Jackson, Mississippi at JSU.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask one final question, and then I really want to hear what the audience has to say from all of this really rich commentary. My last question is, what's your Afrofuturistic vision for the next 5 years? What do you want to see in the world, and how do you see your work helping us get there?
That's the hardest question.
I'll crack at it on the fly. I would love to see Afrofuturism just like I feel like it's happening now, but just like featured more, featured like you could get a degree in Afrofuturism. Really have it be embedded in the curriculums of schools, so not even just colleges, down to like elementary as well, and that it then also helps people in the current movement against police brutality, but also against housing inequality and gentrification. People start actively incorporating this lens to help them imagine better futures and actually enact on that. And then to expand to having solidarity internationally and start all the things we could use, like incorporating music and sound and like technology as well, right? Because we're imagining it, but like there's actually like so much of those things that we thought was just unreal, not possible, is so real right now. So like, but what's also missing is like Black experience in the creation of those things, right? Like, why is it the was it the sensors? Like they just found out, like, well, just reporting that, like, you know, when the faucets have sensors, right? That they didn't incorporate, they don't account for like Black skin in that. So it's actually harder for Black people to activate those things. Like this is effing ridiculous. Afrofuturism is the solution to that. So I want to see us like in producing technology that's incorporated with like social justice embedded in the education of folks.
Yeah, I'm really into like different types of the power of narratives, right? I think inherently I'm a storyteller, or I use images primarily to tell stories. So kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying, I definitely want to see a naturalization of those stories, where it becomes like this is just how things are unfolding, right? Where we start to see more of the wonderful narratives like Octavia Butler's work, which I think is being made into a TV show, like Dawn is being made into a TV show, right? Is that right? It's still happening. Where we see those types of narratives becoming part of our national conversation about about what I call like the privatized oral history, because that's what our entertainment is, right? It's just oral history that has copyrights on it, right? So I want to see those types of things happen. Also, too, I want to see the prison industrial complex go away. I would love for that to happen. Seriously, the destruction of the systems that separate us. In my artist statement, I think I remember saying something like, you know, life is about connections, right? But like our society is about making those connections like disconnected, right? So how do we break through those barriers and use storytelling and activism to really do that? My own work is centered around making connections. I think I've become really, really kind of obsessed with creating spaces where people can actually feel empowered, you know, and actually have conversations. And it's become part of my practice as an artist and as an organizer, and I'm gonna continue doing that. So.
Currently, a lot of the tech companies that we know, a lot of us use technology every day, but in terms of representation at these companies, they're for African Americans, for example, are under 5%, sometimes 2 to 3%, and that number that percentage hasn't changed much in the last 5 years. So in 5 years, I'd like to see incubators in communities where artists are working with coders, are working with musicians, are working with dancers, are working with performers to really create new types of technology, but also create new types of interactions that we create that we can use in our everyday lives. That help us financially, but also help us as a community work together and sort of problem solve in ways that we can't do with the current technology that we have access to. So it's not so much that we increase the percentage of African Americans and Latinos and indigenous people in technology companies, but that we are creating our own systems and platforms for the kinds of interactions with technology and whatever else ourselves, and not using existing technologies, but creating them ourselves. And so that's really what I want to see within 5 years.
So because we are live streaming, I'm going to ask you to use the mic if you have a question, and I'll bring it to you. So let's get some questions. Yeah, in the back.
First of all, thank you, everybody. This has been really inspirational. I'm really glad I took a day off work. I'm wondering if I can antagonize a problem, just kind of make this a little bit more complex by asking you to speak a little bit about the potential for infusing or interjecting Afrofuturism into other forms of popular culture outside of, the geek culture or speculative culture. Nettrice, you mentioned working with Hank Shockley. You also mentioned working, Janelle Monáe's work. I'm really intrigued by the work you're doing, Terry, with Intelligent Mischief, and it reminds me of work that we've done in a fellowship with the Design Studio for Social Intervention, Kenny. And I'm wondering if you guys envision the possibilities of infusing that to widen the audience, so that we widen the conversation and we gain more groundswell and support for the idea of Afrofuturism, because it's happening and it's not going to stop happening. But I know that the tide can turn and be co-opted later on. So I'm wondering if there's any, without necessarily name dropping, but y'all can name drop if you want. Is there any movement on that other level where you see people speaking actively about it?
I mean, to a certain degree, I think it's like you're saying, it's already happening, right? I see that globally, there's been a lot of discussion in cultural production around issues around Black speculative culture, Afrofuturism, and all these different other spaces. They seem to be starting in the academies, right? But they are becoming a little bit more accessible. All the spaces that we create are free and open to the public. So trying to push out that idea, I think, is something that's really a big part of it. I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know if we necessarily need to divorce it from the Black geek culture, because there's such a huge proponent for it. I think as far as like spaces like the Blurred Girl and all these different other spaces that are doing Afro Nerds that are doing like these different types of coverage of those spaces, I think are helping to kind of naturalize those conversations. I think that there's a lot of that already happening. But what's interesting is that when, like for instance, I think I just saw that Ethiopia, for instance, has like started a new space program. Did you read that? Did I just make that up? Okay, because I think I just saw that. I was half asleep, but I think that's happening, right? Or this idea of like future African spaces or future spaces of color that are already happening on a global space, and how that's changing how we're accessing those types of cultural productions too. So I definitely think that is already on the bubble. I think one of my friends, Yatasha Womack, who wrote the book Afrofuturism, that's kind of like a more cursory introduction to the notion, was asking me about like classes on Afrofuturism, like where are they right now, right? And as you were saying, they need to be put into practice. They need to be taught, as part of like the curriculum, that kind of thing. Right now, they're mostly special topics courses, I think. Like mine is a special topics course. So how do we actually have a whole space where that's what your major is, right? I think that's going to happen, but I think it is happening like right now too. So I hope that kind of got at your question. Maybe.
One thing I wanted to add is something that I see that's pretty exciting is the Essence covers with the Black Girl Magic hashtag, how that's been moving. That's another way that I see Afrofuturism coming into spaces that are pretty mainstream and changing the discourse in a lot of different ways. I also work with the Octavia Butler Legacy Network, and part of what we hope to do is create some publicly available curriculum in Afrofuturism for K through 12 that would hopefully just supplement what people have access to in public schools. And what we're thinking about with Ferguson's Future, with which both Nettrice and John were able to participate in, is how do we create incubators for these imaginative kinds of conversations. And an outgrowth of that we were really happy about is that the artists and the writers have their own Facebook group, and people have been bigging each other up with all of the different projects that they're working on. So there's been a lot of energy in taking this conversation a bit further.
To answer the question a little bit about what happens when it gets to the mainstream, for Black Girl Magic, there's a backlash already. When for Dark Tower, Stephen King's book was discussed of the main character being Idris Elba, there was backlash for that. There was backlash for Idris Elba and Thor. There was backlash for Amanda Stenberg and his Rue in Hunger Games. So whenever there are roles in with John Boyega, Star Wars, whenever there are roles where a Black person or person of color is put into a lead role in a futuristic film, or there's backlash. We've been seeing it for the last 3 to 5 years or more. And so this is the pushback of people not used to imagining Black lives in the future. And I think it's important to point that out.
I'll just point to real quickly a local example who Barrington, you already mentioned, Kenny Bailey from Design Studio for Social Intervention, who's standing right there. Raise your hand, Kenny. Yeah. And Kenny's a fool, always taking spotlight. But just point to them, Design Studio, who's like definitely a big influence on Intelligent Mischief and like our Big Brother Big Six organization. In Black History, February, Black History Month, Design Studio hosts talks and features, and anything Design Studio does is like futuristic. It's like that's Afrofuturism in itself. That's locally going to be happening. So check in with Kenny about that afterwards if you're Boston based. But I also say too, I agree. Like it's happening already. There's so much stuff. Like it's so bubbling up about Afrofuturism and like in everywhere you go. But I think particularly, right now it's kind of happening. But particularly, I think you're going to see it much, much more in the margins. So in the margins, I mean globally. Like we're seeing like Kenya, Ethiopia. There's like these sci-fi movies coming out that from the continent. There's always like I was saying like Nigeria is pumping out this like Afro manga and Afro anime stuff that's been popping out. So just look on. I usually see this on OK Africa on Facebook, and I'm just like, this is amazing. Like this is going on. And I think a major thing people should look out for, that's going to be a major opportunity for, I think, organizing, but like changing narrative globally. And I'm telling you on that, I want to say I said it first. Disney and Marvel fucked up. Black Panther, the movie, everyone now we should be figuring out ways to use that narrative, to change that narrative. I don't care how that movie's actually going to be. I do not care. But we could use the narrative around that about seeing Wakanda on the big screen and look at the future. And like if people don't know, Wakanda is the nation that Black Panther comes from, and it's a futuristic nation. It's futuristic in terms of like because they've never been colonized, the type of technology they've been able to create and the things that go on. Also, still using ritual of the past. We got to flip that narrative and use it for all different purposes. Make Wakanda real. That's the campaign I want to start now.
Well, yeah, it's not really We Are Wakanda, right? But,
yes. They're based in Oakland.
Well, and it also, one of the first things that happened too when Chadwick Boseman was cast, right? I forgot who did these pieces, but they started to do these diegetic prototypes or like these. Or it was an artist or a designer that was actually making the currency. They actually had like the Times covers and the Wired covers. I was like, yes, I wanted to get that for the show, but I couldn't track them down. But using graphic design and using like those prototypical spaces to become like indexes or touch points for the future, I think that's extremely smart.
Thank you.
Do it now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. You guys are like vibrating my soul.
I can hear it.
I want to ask, is there any like mainstream, like you guys want to turn your works into short films, movies, anything like that? Because I'm like, I consider myself like a visual artist. Like I see, and I love reading. I love like those comic books. I'm just again vibrating right here as I'm seeing all this work, hearing you guys speak. So I'm just like invigorated with energy.
Just a real quick, please come to Intelligent Mischief. Just please. Talk to us afterwards. Say.
I would say yes, but I'm not going to be making those things. If someone else wants to take an idea, or I'm a graphic novelist, so like I'm an illustrator. I stay in my lane when it comes to, I love I love film and animation quite a bit. There are a couple of projects that we are working with a couple of animators and maybe filmmakers to do on some projects that we're kind of messing around with now. It's supposed to be awesome to see it moving, but to me, like comics already move in my head, so But yeah, I would love to see those types of things happen, definitely.
Answer is yes. Went from video games to film, to multimedia film, theater type of performances that's already in motion.
And other things, just the Black Body Survivor Guide, we already imagine that as a multimedia project. So like I said earlier, we're working with Wheeler College Communications Department. They're not only making more videos for us, but also looking at animation as well. So we're looking at all realms and mediums to pump this through.
I had a question for you guys. Thank you also, by the way, I really appreciated this. So I have a niece and my sister, she lives in Central Massachusetts. I don't know if you guys know anything about Central Massachusetts, probably the whitest place on earth. It's like Iowa. So she's growing up, she's 8, she's very visual, she's very artistic, but she's grown up in majority white spaces, and because of that, when she draws, when she imagines things, she imagines blonde hair, blue eyes. So I was wondering what kind of resources you guys, because you guys talked about from a very, very young age, you guys have had your parents or your family members help you out with, visualizing Afrofuturism. I was wondering if you guys know any resources like that that maybe I could help her with, things like that. If you guys know of any existing resources for, that are appropriate for children or things like that, that would help her visualize her future and Afrofuturism and things like that.
You mean like comics, materials, things of that nature? Let's see. Okay. Yeah. I guess a lot of people mentioned Princeless, right? Yeah, because it's kind of biracial little girl who's it's really an empowering narrative for her. How old's your niece again? She's 8. Oh, man. Malice in Ovenland. Thank you for that. Yes, actually, thank you. Yeah, there's this piece by Micheline Hess called Malice in Ovenland that is actually like a remix of, obviously, Alice in Wonderland. That's published by our publisher and friend Bill Campbell's company, Rosarian Publishing. And it's actually, I think, number 4 is about to come out, I think. I know, right? We need to catch up. Yeah, so that's one particular piece. I was thinking about Princeless. When she gets a little bit older, maybe Miranda Mercury, which is by Brandon Thompson and Lee Ferguson. Imagine like if Buck Rogers was a black woman. There you go. Oh, Maddie's Rocket, actually, too. I think it's all ages. Maddie's Rocket by Tim Fielder, whose work is on display in the show right now, actually, is a very great narrative, too. There's a lot of other spaces. I would say, you said that your friend is going to go maybe to the Harlem show? Okay, so maybe have her, because there's a lot of people there that are working on like newer narratives, too. So I would say do that. And we could talk after.
We will have a reception, so we can continue this conversation in the gallery. Oh, is there another question? I'm sorry.
I think she had it.
I'm really intrigued. One of the reasons I came here today is I work in social justice with Mel King, and I run a STEM education program where the youth learn, build, and then go out and teach what they've learned to younger kids in the community. A few years ago, the young people said they really wanted to learn to code, hardcore coding, not just scratch with drag and drop coding. They wanted to learn. But all the approaches that are out there aren't working for them. And I'm so intrigued because we went through a design process and last year piloted something. And so many of the themes that you bring up are so powerful because they wanted to see coding as storytelling. And they actually came up with the idea, and I'm working with Sharon de la Cruz in the Bronx right now to develop a sort of graphic novel with superheroes that are about where the superheroes are sensors and different kinds of motors and things. But this whole idea of imagining it through this Afrofuturism imagery sounds really exciting to me. If you do know of anybody who's doing work like this, I'm just so excited that the youth that I work with are moving in this direction. And now when I come here, I'm seeing that too. And I'd love to hear of any ideas that you have or any projects that you know of that are similar to this, because I think that this could sort of revolutionize the way that people learn coding and make it accessible and culturally relevant to them.
There is a Arduino is like the standard do-it-yourself makerspace computing connection to coding for a lot of young people, and they do have a comic book. So right, it's very bare bones. It's not, you know, and what I'm saying is this touch point, the idea of taking that idea and the notion of doing that and allowing young people to develop it, I think is a really good start to engaging in them in that, and where they create the narrative and they create the content, and then they, I think this is an opportunity to sort of become immersed in in all the different media that they can have access to and exposure to. But then how would you use that to create a comic book like the Arduino comic, to create something for teaching young people, young Black and brown children, how to code? I think would be a great idea. Exactly. And one thing I'll say is one of the things that when I work with the young people with Susan, we worked on looking at Ferguson protests, and the young people wanted to figure out a way to create technology to give, in this case, Harvard graduate of ed students experience of their message about Black Lives Matter. And one of the things we talked about is, I talked to them about, is the idea of the censor or being a call and response tool the way that the African drum is. And where calls and responses it's actually working exactly the same way. So for them to be able to make an analogy between the technology that that's foreign to them, and then something that's a little more culturally relevant to them, was something that I talked to the young people about, so they could see themselves using this stuff and also have a cultural connection to that as well. So this thing, okay.
Got one more question.
Thank you. That's loud. I am 20. I am white. I just left computer engineering. I'm now doing animation. As a future producer of art similar to this nature, what do you want to see from someone, me or someone like me, who will never be Black, but doesn't want to shut down or wants to bolster Afrofuturism?
I have a student working on an EP around social justice who is white and really he has a network of high school friends, college friends who are very talented musicians. And what he's done is he's invited them to contribute and work with him on the EP, where he helps provide the resources and does the background work, but then also allows them for it to be their voice. That they are part of the content of this EP. So it's not his vision. He wants to do the EP and he wants this to happen, but the voices are coming from the people who experience it firsthand. And I think that's what happens when you have an Avatar film, is you have people who don't represent the people, the indigenous people, for example, and yet they're creating these indigenous worlds without that input. It's just the surface, as opposed to inviting indigenous people to the table to discuss how that world would be and what those characters would do. So we have a lot of that in video games. We have a lot of that in comics. We have a lot of that in films, where the creator is white, but the content is Black. But there is no input from the communities from which that represent these people. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't have a diverse, these industries are not diverse, but also I think it's an opportunity to invite people to the table and be comfortable with hearing from these groups and communities about what is important to show on screen.
I think you're already starting just by positing that question, right? I mean, that's the thing. It has to start with that space that you're to be open and to be willing to help be a facilitator. So, for instance, some of those narratives I mentioned earlier, like Miranda Mercury, the co-creator Lee Ferguson is white, right? Princeless, the guy that created Princeless, and I'm totally spacing on his name, He's married to a black woman, and his child, his daughter, is biracial, and so he created that for her because he didn't see representations of his daughter. So that's already happening. My my one of my collaborators, Damian Duffy, is white. It's a white Irish cat, like 10 years my junior, and he's dedicated like the last decade of his life to creating these spaces. So the Black Comics book we did, the shows that we've curated, were done by this gentleman, right? So I think that you already, to be willing to have the conversation and to understand like that you are acting as a facilitator or someone who actually is an ally, I think is a really great space to start, right?
I'd just like to add something I would really love to see that I don't see in a lot of spaces is white people talking to white people, having those hard conversations about racism. So what does that look like? I don't see that in comics. I don't see that in film. I would love to see what that actually looks like. What's the conversation of doing anti-racist work for white people in white spaces? I think that would be a really different way to take the conversation.
So we've asked Stacey to give us some final words.
Before I start, I just want to make sure that I remind everyone, I'm going to look at my notes. Yes, remind everyone that right after this, we are continuing the conversation in Gallery 360, right downstairs, where there will be a reception and refreshments and fun and fellowship. Okay? I have been hard pressed. This is my first time ever doing the closing remarks. And I have to say, I've been hard pressed on what am I going to say? I've been thinking about this all day. It's been nervous as hell, right? And I just had to, this entire day, I just realized that I've been taking notes and trying to remember certain points. And I have to say that I'm glad I don't have a pre-made speech, that this has been a conversation. This entire day has been a conversation that does not typically take place. I like that very last question of the day, right? About allies. And it just made me think, I don't think we care where allies come from. I think it matters that we have allies, right? And this is for any type of injustice, right? That we have people that understand the truth of the story and that are able to have the conversation about the truth of the story and that are able to enact, to incite, to excite, right? And to bring about social change, because that's really what this day is about, right? We're talking about future spaces. We're talking about why comics, right? We're talking about building the world, drawing the world that you want to see, right? There are so many creators in this room. There are so many like-minded individuals in this room. There are so many fans in this room. There are so many geeks in this room. There are so many academics in this room. And it's interesting because we actually represent the constituency that will change the mainstream media, will change the comic book industry, will change the film industry. We're the fans on the outside. Most of us are not mainstream, right? We're on the outside of the bubble. And we are making the change that we want to see. I think continuing that conversation and bringing that center stage is the way to continue that. I just took some really quick notes I wanted to share about some highlights of the day, some thoughts that just jumped out to me. I love the idea, we were talking, it was brought up, Afrofuturism in 5 years. What does the Black future look like in 5 years? And talking about Afrofuturism as a curriculum. Or how to connect in a community where we are meant to be disconnected in that community. How do we use technology to change our social conditions? Artists and coders working together to actually change our living conditions. I thought that was fascinating to think about that and to actually be in a space where we actually can really do that. Right? To think about that. I was thinking about some other thoughts. Nettrice talked about putting yourself as the center of the universe, right? I found that fascinating, thinking about we have the ability to create our own narratives and be the center of our story, right? Octavia Butler talked about that and said that, the reason why she started creating narratives was because she saw a narrative that sucked, didn't make sense, and did not include her, right? And look at the legacy she created because of that. Keith mentioned earlier, he talked about he talked about one of his favorite characters growing up, Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe, and how you don't see his face, and that he could be anybody under the mask, and he found that fascinating. But when his mask finally comes off, he's just like the typical narrative, a regular white person. And what does that mean in reference to narratives and how we create a normalcy and creating narratives? Marjorie talked about, it was interesting because there are some connections between what Marjorie said and what Terry said. And Marjorie was talking about her book Monstrous being a safe space for women. I found that very interesting because I didn't realize until somebody else brought it up. Yeah, until John brought it up, we were talking about, this book was all women almost. I was like, I didn't even realize it. I was just reading it. It was an amazing story, and it really showed me that what really matters is the core of the story and the realness of the characters and creating stories. But it connected to something that Terry said, and he talked about queerness and performance and the festival that he had seen as a safe space. This one particular time of the year was a safe space for queer folks to come out and be themselves. I found that very interesting, the idea of a safe space. This room is a safe space. And if you look at the diversity in this room, I guarantee there are overlaps in our stories and our childhood and the way that we interact with others, right, and the things that we love. There are overlaps in our lives, but yet there's a lot of diversity, and I guarantee, I would think that we're all a bunch of geeks, right? That geekness in this room becomes a safe space. This becomes our utopia, right? This is the place where we are, where we can actually be ourselves when we can't necessarily be ourselves in front of many other people. There was another idea that somebody brought up about the building sustainability, right, earlier. And I was thinking about internet culture and the independent comic book subculture and how that allows us to connect our communities in ways that we actually could not before, right? I was thinking about ideas of the magic and the monstrous and the queerness, right, becoming a norm, right? Not as in the outside culture becoming a normative and something. These are some of the ideas that just came to my mind as I was just listening to everybody today. Let me see, what else did I write down? Oh my goodness. Whit talked about her Black identity, how she illustrates that through her comic books and has conversations with her audience that she couldn't necessarily have in any other particular way. They take place in a very unique space in her comic books. I found that very, very interesting. I wrote a bunch of stuff down here, and they weren't in any particular order. I will say that my encouragement, I would say that I wanted to write down some encouragement. And, we're up on stage, and many of us are creators up here, but I really wanted to encourage you to really think about and build your space for freedom and expression. Actually build your space. Use your particular skill set, your geekdom, to actually build your space, right? Do not rely on anyone else to build your space. If you, for example, a lot of Black folks in this room today, a lot of Black creators, right? For example, do not expect me to illustrate your narrative. Do not expect me to tell your story. I can't tell your story the way that you can tell your story. Now, you can connect with another artist, you can connect with a writer, but it is important that you are in the center of your universe to tell your story. Does that make sense? Because nobody's saying anything. It's like, I don't know if I'm making any sense at all. I think I had like 5 minutes. I think I am done. I want to remind everyone to go downstairs, check out the show. The show is an awesome show. It is full of commentary. It will excite and it will incite. Let's continue downstairs. Let's continue this conversation downstairs over some refreshments and some more food, fun, and fellowship. All right, thank you. Oh, you know, I'm sorry. Let me shout out some folks. Oh my goodness, how am I being so rude? Thank you, Northeastern, for hosting us. Bree Edwards, Jamie Bergeron, Bruce Ployer. Yes, thank you so much for having us. Yeah. Let's
and the panelists up
Oh my
there.
God, yes, all the panelists, yes, thank you. I am just rude. This is a horrible job. All right, thank you so much. Let's continue this conversation downstairs. Do not walk out the door, walk downstairs. Okay, all right, thank you.